Welcome back into another episode of the Bleav in Georgia Tech podcast. We're your co-hosts. That is RJ Schafer. I'm Jackson Caudell coming to you. We are doing our preview episode on a Thursday this time because somebody's baseball team had to play a baseball game yesterday afternoon, but the Tigers won. The Braves didn't. So RJ's happy today. I'm more of in a downer mood. So, I guess, I usually ask you how you're doing at the top of every episode, but I know how you're doing.
Yeah, I got my revenge from earlier in the season when the Braves beat the Tigers. So I'd say the series means a little bit more.
Yep. But yeah, so we are coming to you on a Thursday. That was, we were RJ. Obviously, he covers the Tigers as well. So we have to try to. This is October baseball, so we have to try to plan to do multiple shows. So we are coming to you on Thursday. Before we get started into our Duke preview, just get a couple of housekeeping things out of the way. Just if you're watching on YouTube, hey, we're getting up there in subscribers. We love the support you guys have shown. It really means a lot to us. Just subscribe to the show, hit that notification bell, like the video. Just helps us out a ton to keep growing this and and keep making content for you guys like that. That helps out a lot, and we really appreciate you guys doing that. So it's been a little slow because we had a bye week last week. Now and we've kind of been slowly leading up to the game, but we are going to give you a full preview for Georgia Tech and Duke. We're not able to get a guest this weekend, so you are stuck with yours truly for this one. And this is, it's not talked about much this weekend, but this is a very, very interesting game this weekend. Obviously, I don't know, if you just told somebody that's not a Georgia Tech fan blindly, hey, Georgia Tech and Duke, Duke's the team that Georgia Tech's played the third most games against behind Georgia and actually Auburn, which I didn't know that before this week. Georgia Tech and Duke have played a lot over the years, obviously being ACC rivals and stuff. Georgia Tech does lead the all-time series. They've had success recently, and that was one of Brent Key. That was his first home victory as an interim coach. He took over after Jeff Collins got fired, went on the road and beat Pitt, and then came back home and beat Duke in overtime. I'm sure every Yellow Jackets fan can remember that game. I was there for that game. That was my first year covering the team for on SI. It was a fun game. There was some special team stuff. I think Duke had a punt return in that game, and then Georgia Tech won on a field goal. Leo Blackburn caught a sick touchdown in that game. There's definitely some stuff to remember the last time these two played. But then, the ACC went divisionless, and they didn't play last year, which was kind of odd, I guess. But they are back at it this year. Duke is off to a really good start. Their best start since 1994. They are 5-0. We'll get into some of the teams they played. That will definitely be a talking point because I've heard a lot of it this week from some of you guys as the about Duke's record, but they've had a really good bit of success. And I don't know. I was among the people that wondered if there was going to be a huge drop off this year with the success that Mike Elko had. Obviously, they were very successful under Elko, especially on defense. And Georgia Tech got some of those guys that were successful. Tyler Santucci, the defensive coordinator, Jess Simpson, the defensive line coach, were at Duke previously. Of course, they're with the Yellow Jackets now, but there's some interesting storylines to this game. But before we get into kind of the offense versus defense type stuff, is there anything about this game that stands out to you personally?
I just think it's interesting because out of all of the games that Georgia Tech has played, each week, we've kind of had an expectation of what we thought the game was going to be. We kind of knew what each team was, probably with the exception of Florida State. I don't really know to the fullest extent who Duke is because, it's very possible that Duke could look a lot better than we think. But it's also possible that their record could be, misleading because I did not think heading into the season that Duke would be, 5-0 heading into week 6.
No, I did not either. But they are. And I know there's a lot of talk about discrediting Duke because of their schedule, and I do understand that. But I think you have to give them a lot of credit. They had a lot of talent leave, and especially when a successful coaching staff like that leaves. And for Manny Diaz to come in there, obviously he used to be the head coach at Miami, then was the defensive coordinator at Penn State, took over there. He had a lot of moving pieces around there. And I do think you have to give him a lot of credit. We're going to talk about Duke's defense, but Manny Diaz has been one of the best defensive coordinators for a long time. Like, he's not been perfect everywhere. Like, I know he had some hiccups at Texas where he did get fired, but was very good at Mississippi State, was very, very good at Miami. That ended up getting him the head coaching job there at one point. And while his head coaching tenure was not great at Miami, their defenses were still good, and he had a large role to play in that. Penn State had some of the best defenses in the country the past couple of years. He's had some guys get drafted and elevated to first-round picks. So I can tell you while that you can maybe still wonder how good of a head coach Manny Diaz is. He is an excellent defensive coach, and like it shows in their defensive play this year. Like we'll dig into that a little bit more, but I guess you ready to talk some matchups?
Yes, sir.
All right, so I want to talk about this first. Georgia Tech's defense versus Duke's offense. Like, I know the headliner is kind of, Georgia Tech's offense versus Duke's defense, kind of maybe their strength on strength, but I am very curious to see how this turns out because up to this point, Duke has not had a fantastic offense. They're not like horrible, but some of the numbers, they are 13th in the ACC in total yards per game. 10th in passing yards per game, averaging about 247 yards a game through the air. 15th in rush yards per game, only 120 yards per game on the ground. And they have a solid running back, but they have not been able to run it super successfully game to game. And they've only played one top 35 defense. I think that would be something that would concern me if I was a Duke fan, is their offense has not been the greatest, and Northwestern is the only pretty solid defense they played. Like, so here's Duke's schedule so far. They have beaten Elon, they have beaten Northwestern in overtime, they have beaten UConn, Middle Tennessee State, and of course the comeback last week against North Carolina. So UConn, Middle Tennessee State are like some of the worst defenses in the country. Like they are all pretty bad. North Carolina obviously has. North Carolina is not even ranked very high on defense, but even those numbers, like they're like the mid 70s in total defense. Those numbers are kind of inflated from some of the teams they played at the beginning of the year, like NC Central. Minnesota is like an abhorrent defense. Like they are like terrible. They haven't really had to, like North Carolina. Is just not a good defense, and so. The Duke offense has been kind of sputtering a little bit while not facing some of the defenses, but they have bright spots. Like I don't want like this to sound dismissive of Duke or anything, because they have guys that do have talent. Malik Murphy is their quarterback. He used to be a very highly rated recruit, went to Texas. He was kind of the odd man out in the Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning, Malik Murphy. Like that's just, when you're in that talented of a quarterback room, like that's pretty tough. He is not very consistent. He was the backup over Arch last year, and he got some starts, and it didn't go super well. But this year he's got 12 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He's 4th in the ACC in passing yards. He's had a pretty solid year. He's completed about 60% of his passes, just kind of inconsistent. But you can definitely see the talent with Murphy there.
Yeah, and I think you can see the talent kind of all across the board, even though they have underperformed. Winning games is winning games. Like, obviously, the game against North Carolina, you're never going to see a comeback like that. That was Duke's biggest comeback in a game since beating Florida in 1964. Like, so I'd say it's pretty significant. But Star Thomas is the guy I kind of want to talk about on offense. He's been on and off the best player on the offense. He was by far the best player for Duke last week. Obviously had an absurd amount of carries. He was the ACC running back of the week. 30 touches, obviously over 160 yards, another touchdown. Like he did make a big impact. I think it's kind of diminished by the way that it happened. Like, he cut off some big rushes late in the game, but he is their workhorse guy. Their offense runs through him. When the run doesn't work, short pass, they never really throw the ball downfield. I guess you could say that about Georgia Tech too, but I think Duke even more. The ball doesn't really get pushed past the 10-yard line, besides on rare occasions. But I think Star Thomas is by far the guy that, like, you're going to game plan against him 4 days on end, because he's very good in the open field. He he knows what he is as a runner. He's not the best running back in the ACC, but he knows what he is.
He's a good player for sure.
Yeah.
And he leads their ground attack. I want to highlight the receivers a little bit because, we talk about Georgia Tech's defense and they clearly have some issues. Like there's zero doubt about that. But they are, let's see, third or fourth in the ACC, third in rushing yards allowed per game. Like they have been able to stop teams on the ground. And I respect Louisville's running game a little bit more. And they clogged that up like that. They really held Louisville down. Of course, we know Georgia Tech's issue on defense this year has been against the pass, pressuring the quarterback, creating turnovers, just stopping the pass in general. They are 121st in drop back success rate allowed, which is really, really bad. That's nearly bottom of the country. So, I know that's why I'm just so interested in Malik Murphy and these receivers versus the Georgia Tech secondary, because Duke actually has some good receivers. Jordan Moore is second in the ACC in receiving yards with 420. He's third in receptions with 28. And they also have some other guys as well. Eli Pankel, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, by the way. Apologies if not. He has 18 catches for 231 yards, 4 touchdowns. Not the biggest average, but they have Nicky Dalmelin, their tight end, 9 catches, 150 yards. He's averaging 16.7 yards per catch. So, they have some guys that can go get it. And I'm wondering, is that going to be the game plan? Is it going to be – because, again, Star Thomas is good. He's also averaging less than 5 yards per carry. So, he's not exactly, just turning out yards on a high efficiency or volume basis. I'm wondering if they're going to come out and try to attack Georgia Tech deep because – look, Kyle McCord and Tyler Shuck both got the ball out pretty quickly. And, because, a couple of the long plays with Louisville where, when Georgia Tech blitzed and they would hit those crossing routes underneath and they just took for a big gain. And then, Ja'Cory Brooks had that touchdown catch over Amari Harvey. So I'm very interested to see how Georgia Tech tries to play this Duke offense because, again, numbers-wise, they're not, super great at anything, and they haven't really faced a good defense yet. Numbers-wise, Northwestern's defense is better than Georgia Tech's because Georgia Tech just has that big glaring issue of the pass defense, and it's Duke has the weapons where they could test it. Would you agree with that?
I'd agree to an extent. I will say I think it's going to be ground game for a while unless they get into a big deficit. Just comparing Star Thomas and Jamal Haynes, I know they're not equal. I know they don't play the same roles. Star Thomas has 99 carries throughout the season. Jamal Haynes is 58. That's a large discrepancy, and I would say Georgia Tech runs the ball a lot. Granted, Haynes didn't get the ball a lot in the VMI game. He's been banged up on and off. Star Thomas, I think, is their guy. I think they will start to open up throughout the game, and I think they really do, like you said, don't necessarily want to push the ball down the field, but those little crossing routes, maybe get Star Thomas open in space. He's been seldom used, receiving wise, but he is good in that role too. There's a lot that they can do, and I think if they want to take the top off the defense, they can try. But most of their big plays, they've had 3 or 4 plays over 30 yards this year. Most of them are crossing routes where they break a tackle, go downfield for 40, 50 yards. But maybe they do start to open it up against Georgia Tech.
Yeah. Some other numbers for Duke, offensive success rate, they are ranked 85th, 73rd in rushing success rate, 74th in drop back success rate. Not great. EPA drop back 94th. They are 30th in EPA rush. They are also 126th in third and fourth down success rate. So it has not been great. Again, with Georgia Tech being able to, up to this point, being able to stop the run, that's why I just wonder if they try. They have the weapons to attack Georgia Tech's secondary. It is my question. Obviously, Star Thomas is going to get some run in there. So I'll be anxious to see. This is the matchup that I'm just really intrigued by because, again, it's kind of, weakness on weakness a little bit. Duke is not a high-flying offense that's going to put 50 on somebody. And, obviously Georgia Tech's not a juggernaut on the defensive side of the ball. They do some things well, but also, they have the pieces. Duke has the pieces to where maybe they can exploit some of Georgia Tech's bigger weaknesses, like pass rush, coverage, They haven't been able to create any turns. Like Georgia Tech doesn't have an interception this year. Now, Malik Murphy is not like a super turnover prone quarterback. He has thrown 4 interceptions this year. Like that's not insane, but also like it's not like I don't think he's super protective of the ball either. So like you might have some opportunities in this game.
Yeah, and I don't know really what the focus will be on defense because obviously not having an interception to this point is alarming to say the least. But I don't know what is really going to be the goal on defense because you don't really know what Duke is going to do. I think Malik Murphy is good. I don't think he's very turnover prone. I think his decision making is questionable. He doesn't really force the ball in places where it shouldn't be because he really doesn't like throwing the ball downfield. Mm-hmm. But I think it is possible that you can rattle him, especially if you can get to him. And I think that's going to be one of the keys to the game is get to him fast, make him get the ball out fast, whether it's a catch or not.
So, like, he was fairly steady as far as completion percentage goes those first 4 games. I mean, Elon, he was 26 of 40. Northwestern, 24 of 39. UConn, 28 of 43. Middle Tennessee State, 14 of 21. I mean, he was 15 of 34 last week. I mean, that's where I'm kind of wondering, like, okay, I know North Carolina's defense isn't great. It's a lot better than Middle Tennessee State's and UConn. Like, UConn's not great. So, I don't know. Just wondering, like a 20.7 QBR, like it's not great. Like, but he has the talent. Is more of what I'm alluding to. And then the struggles that Georgia Tech secondary has had. Like, is this going to be a Malik Murphy breakout game? Like, we'll see. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm very, very, very intrigued. So on the defensive side, like, kind of who are you looking at for Georgia Tech to step up? Because I think obviously, like, my talking points have been the secondary. Look, we can talk till we're blue in the face about the pass rush still. 5 sacks, and it's just it is what it is. Like, they haven't been able. Now I know Brent Key did highlight, and I think he did have a point during his press conference earlier this week that they were able to generate a little bit of pressure. I think it was on the blitz. They just weren't able to get home, which I know is mostly the objective. But I do think there were times they were able to affect Tyler Shuck a little bit. Duke's offensive line is not one of the better ones in the ACC. Like, he has been sacked 7 times. Like, again, that's not like outrageously bad, but also like don't look at Duke's offensive line and look at it as just some big strength. Like, they're just gonna, Georgia Tech's defensive line has no chance against. So like, there could be some opportunities there. Like, I really think the defensive line is gonna have to play well. We've seen the linebackers targeted a little bit in space. Like, I know, especially in the Syracuse and Louisville games, like Kyle Eifert is a good player. He can struggle in coverage sometimes. Like, that's just not his number one strength. And I think, Jeff Brom was trying to get some matchups there. Again, I don't think they have an offensive savvy guy, obviously, like Jeff Brom, but like, I do wonder if they've seen that on tape and they try to do something similar with that. But I think that the coverage is just going to have to be key here. Duke has, like, Jordan Moore is good. They have some other guys that can make plays. So like, I think this is a big game for the secondary. Again, you're not facing they're a big downgrade in terms of passing offense from Louisville, but still, like, when you rank 121st in drop back success rate allowed, like, that pretty much means you're letting a lot of things fly.
Yeah. Well, and one guy that you mentioned, he's going to be my key. I think it has to be Kyle Eifert. Again, he's not the greatest guy in coverage. A lot of Tech fans really fell in love with him late in the season because he was so good in the open field. Kind of came out of nowhere, was the best player on the defense, arguably, for the last, latter half of the season. But he has been demolished in coverage the entire year. Like, there was one play, and I talk about this play a lot. It's just, trauma from the Syracuse game. Oronde Gadsden lined up in the slot. Only man defending him is Kyle Eifert, and Gadsden gets down the field. And they really cannot let that happen in this game. Not because I think, the Duke defense is incredible, but with the Duke offense, they don't really score a lot of points often. And if you're giving away points, they are a low drive team. You put yourself in a bad situation where the game could be close at the end. And you don't want that with Duke because we've seen games being close to the end. Duke, they have pulled out in every single close game that they've had, even if it's against a lesser opponent or a team that, some would argue is better in North Carolina.
Yeah, and look, I think to your point, they could run the ball a lot because, again, they are not a super great run defense, but like, look at some of their game scripts a little bit. Like, okay, going back to Middle Tennessee, they had 35 carries for 124 yards, only averaging 3.5 yards a rush. Like, that to me shows like they're just going to keep slamming it ahead, like, no matter what. And then, okay, for North Carolina, they had 185 yards on 41 rushing attempts, which is a little bit better, but that's only 4.5 yards a carry. Like that's okay. Like it's, they're not like super efficient running the ball. And then like you can go to the Northwestern game. They had 30 carries for 93 yards. That's bad. Like so they're going to run the football. Like I'm not going to sit here. I'm like, obviously I think they may try to throw it maybe a little bit more than normal, just seeing where Georgia Tech's weaknesses are on the defensive side of the ball. But also like they're good. Like they've shown like they're going to run the ball. And I think you're going to see some RPOs as well. Like I know Mekhi Scott was talking about that yesterday when he talked to the media. Was that something they've really been prepping for this week, was just trying to know how to defend the RPOs, being ready as a defensive line. So you are going to see that. So I'm interested to see how they come out and try to attack Georgia Tech's defense because, like, clearly you look at the statistical profile, like you would want to try to air it out a little bit, but can they do that? I don't know. They haven't really been able to this point. They weren't last week. I mean, Star Thomas won them that game last week. That Star Thomas and the defense won the North Carolina game last week. So very intrigued there. Any notes here?
Yeah, the one last thing I will say is the defensive line is kind of going to be very paramount in this game. The Duke offensive line, I don't hate it. I think it's one of the, lesser units in the ACC. You can kind of see that by the rushing numbers. You can also see that by the amount of pressure numbers under Malik Murphy. The reason why he's only been sacked 7 times is because he's very good at avoiding pressure. He's very agile in the pocket, I guess you could say. But if you can get to him, if you can pressure him, I think that's how we could see, a completion percentage like we saw against UNC. It's just getting out to a lead early and applying pressure on the defensive line.
And like just a feather in the cap of they're not very efficient running the ball. 27 carries for 59 yards versus Elon. Not great. So that's why I'm leaning towards maybe they try to throw the ball a little bit more, especially if they don't have success early. All right, but let's flip sides and let's talk probably strength on strength here. Georgia Tech offense, Duke defense. Brent Key was very, very complimentary of their defense and gave a lot of praise to Manny Diaz. Like I praise Manny Diaz at the top of the show. Is a very good defensive coach. Look, they're 5th in the ACC in scoring, 4th in yards allowed per game, 11th in rushing yards allowed per game, 1st in passing yards allowed per game. Now, okay, let me at least finish reading this. Like Vincent Anthony is a guy that I think everybody should know. 3.5 sacks. He has one of the top pressure rates on PFF. For those of you that like that kind of thing, they're 8th in sacks in the entire country, not in the ACC, in the entire country. 16th in turnovers gained, 10th in third down defense, and 2nd in the country in tackles for loss. Now, I think they are a good defense. I think they are well coached. I do want to give this out. So the top offenses they have played, and again, I can't count Elon in this. Like Elon is absolutely putrid, like they're terrible, and an FCS team. UConn is 24th. They're not a bad offense. They scored 21 points on Duke. North Carolina is 37th. Like we know they have Amari and Hampton, and they have some guys there. The other two offenses they've played are Northwestern and Middle Tennessee State, ranked 122nd and 125th respectively. I think Duke's defense is good. I also don't think they've been tested largely. Like I think this is by far the biggest test that they're going to face, and that's why I'm so curious as to how it's going to turn out. I'm not at all sitting here saying they're about to get an awakening. I'm not saying that at all. I just think it's interesting. They haven't faced an offense with this amount of playmakers because North Carolina's got some serious quarterback issues. Like they have some talent on offense, but it's mostly in the running game. Like they have Hampton, and that's pretty much it right now. Like they just don't really have a consistent passing game. And, that's pretty much been the highlight. But going back to that, like Duke's defense is obviously like they create a lot of havoc. They've really defended the pass well. Again, they haven't really faced a strong passing attack. Like, this is by far the best passing attack they've had. And then, we've been pretty critical of the run game. Like, and I want to preface it by saying, like, the run game has not fallen off a cliff. Like, it is still like averaging 160 yards per game on the ground. Now, that's only good for 10th in the ACC, but it's not like the complete bottom out. Like, but they've struggled, and like Duke has some difference makers up front to where this is going to be another test. Like, because Syracuse doesn't have a good defense either, and they were able to pretty effectively shut Georgia Tech's run game down. Haynes King was the highlight of that day. Jamal Haynes is struggling that game. He's been struggling for a little bit, being banged up and all. But Duke's defense hasn't, been exceptional against the run. Like, they've had, like I said, they're not at the top of the ACC in rushing defense. So I think this may be the week that the running game bounces back. Well, I guess just what are your first thoughts on the Duke defense and maybe how Georgia Tech tries to attack them?
Yeah, like, this pass rush for Duke is by far one of the best in the ACC. But taking it from the Georgia Tech side, like, the Yellow Jackets are one of 3 teams in the FBS level that have not allowed a sack. Every other team in the ACC is allowed at least 4 sacks. Like, that number is significant. The 2 other teams, I don't remember who they are off the top of my head, but they haven't really played a large amount of talent. I think Georgia Tech has played a lot of good talent, especially up front. Florida State, even with how bad they've been, that front 4, that front 7 is still good. Louisville obviously has a good front 4, but Duke has a good one too. They're second in the ACC. They have 17 sacks. Alex Howard is a guy that I think is important to look out for. He's really good in pass coverage. He also has 3 sacks. He also leads Duke with 38 tackles. I think there's a lot to handle on the offensive line. I think this could be the game where Georgia Tech lets up their first sack, and I know that sounds crazy saying this, week 6 of the season, they're 3-2, and they haven't let up a sack. This defensive front will get you. They are big, they are tall, and they are strong. But I think Georgia Tech can do the same way. It's just the ability to get the ball out fast, the ability to find a hole in the running game. I feel like that's crucial, but also, this Duke defensive line is probably the best position group that will be on the field.
Are you saying for Duke or for just the whole game?
For Duke.
Okay. I was like, oh, hot take, RJ. Yeah, I would agree with that. And look, I was pretty critical of North Carolina's passing attack, but they did find some success against Duke last week a little bit. They were 21-39 for 251 yards passing. Jacoby Criswell is kind of an erratic quarterback a little bit. Like, he is not the most consistent. They did outgain Duke last week, just throwing that out there. But yeah, I'm very, very curious. Who are the 2 teams in the ACC to have 2 guys in the top 10 in receiving yards? Georgia Tech and Miami. Malik Rutherford and Eric Singleton are in the top 10 in the ACC in receiving yards, and then Miami has Xavier Strepo and Isaiah Horton. Miami is averaging 49 points a game right now. They have one of the better offenses out there. So those 2 have been very, very good to start the season. But like, I don't think we can talk about this matchup between the offensive line for Georgia Tech and Duke's defensive line like enough. And what is actually like fascinating is like Duke lost a ton of they lost some guys. Dwayne Carter was drafted into the NFL. Aeneas Peebles transferred to Virginia Tech. RJ Oben, he transferred to Notre Dame. Like, they lost some guys on the D line last year because, like we said, like under Mike Elko and Tyler Santucci and Jess Simpson, like they had some really good talent up front. They lost a little bit, but they're still able. Like I told you, Vincent Anthony is a very, very good player. Like, he will be playing on Sundays in the near future. So, look, I can't stress it enough. Like, they have to be able to stay on track. Duke lives on defense off chaos. That's how Manny Diaz has always been. Like, you go back and watch his defenses at Miami, Mississippi State, whatever, Penn State especially. Like, they thrive on creating negative plays and getting after the quarterback and blitzing. Like, they come after you. Haynes King talked about it yesterday. Like they have to stay ahead of the chains. Like that's going to be one of the keys to this game. And I agree with him. And it's going to be a different defensive scheme too. Like this is not something, it's not like I'm not like trying to say like Manny Diaz has cracked some defensive scheme code, but it's a little different than what you've seen so far. And I think I don't think it's the best defense you've seen. Like I still think Louisville's probably the best, but Duke presents a lot of challenges. And then they have some guys in the secondary that really can make plays as well. Like I don't want that to go unnoticed. Like Jalen Stinson's a guy, like I don't think he gets enough credit for how good he is. Like he is a playmaker in the back there. He's got 23 tackles, 3 pass deflections. Terry Moore has a couple of INTs this year. And then, haven't even talked about the linebackers yet. Alex Howard leads them in tackles with 38. He also has 3 sacks as well. I've told you about Vincent Anthony, who leads the team in sacks, but Alex Howard's been able to get after the quarterback as well. Cameron Bergeron, he has 30 tackles, a sack and a half, 2 pass deflections. Like they have guys, they have good players littered everywhere on this defense.
Yeah, and I think Georgia Tech does too on offense. This is probably one of the, I wouldn't say scariest matchups. It's just weird because
it's intriguing because there is as well as Haynes King is taking care of the ball this year, there are you don't have to look far for them either getting behind the chains or maybe they send some looks he hasn't seen so far as maybe blitzes or pressures. Because again, Diaz is very, very good at doing that type of stuff. And, maybe he does make a mistake. And, we haven't had to, for some of the hiccups, we've been watching on the offense this year, we haven't had to deal with okay, we can't stop turning the ball over and what are we going to do type thing. I wonder, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but against this kind of defense, that's I told you, they are 16th in the nation in turnovers gained, not 16th in the ACC. They are 16th in the nation in turnovers gained. They do a good job of taking away the football, creating havoc and doing all that kind of important stuff. And that's, Louisville's pretty good at that, but the other defenses Tech's faced is not. I don't think this is the best defense that Tech's faced, and that's more of a compliment to Louisville. I think Louisville has a good defense, but it is very chaotic. It's very chaotic.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Haynes King, obviously we saw last year. You can talk about the interceptions. We could really talk about that for hours. That was a problem. I think he looks like an entirely different quarterback this year.
And that's what I wanted to point out. That's not a problem this year, but it's and that's a good thing. It's just, what if it became one for one game against a crazy defense?
Well, yeah, and we saw that last year too. I'm not saying Haynes King is a perfect quarterback. He can throw an interception. This year he's looked a lot different. Granted, I think his role has been a little bit limited in comparison to last year. Just because he is running the ball so much, I don't think he's really throwing the ball downfield. We kind of saw that against VMI. Hasn't really happened to the extent that you would think. But I mean, he's really one of the, I don't know if you would say objectively the best, but could get himself into the top 3, top 5 best Georgia Tech quarterbacks of all time, because he's 9th in Georgia Tech history in passing yards in only his second year. 76, I believe, 78 passing yards. He'll pass John Dewberry. He will be 8th on Georgia Tech's all-time list of passing. He's really a guy that, I think Brent Key has wanted. Obviously a guy coming in, transferring, but I think he kind of serves the identity of a Georgia Tech quarterback. He is very, again, we've all said, I think this word is overused in football. He's a very gritty player. And I think, yeah, but I think that's why he gives you such an opportunity in this game. I think if you had anybody else back there, you would kind of feel diminished about your plans. But because of the way he can turn, these negative, what are called chaos plays, into gains, into 10-yard, 15-yard rushes, finding Malik Rutherford on a crossing route. We've seen it all year. I think he will be able to navigate the chaos. I don't think this is not a nightmare matchup for Haynes King and Jamal Haynes and everybody.
Yeah, I want to say it's a different matchup. I don't think it's a nightmare matchup either, but I think it's a different matchup. And they haven't Haynes King and Manny Diaz doesn't have like a ton of like disciples off his like staff or anything, so it's not like you've played somebody that runs this kind of similar defense before. It is, I think, more of my point. It's just it can be a little different and throw some new things at you. One thing I do want to say is Duke has not played a ton of like actual dual threat quarterbacks. I mean,
Yeah.
Jacoby Criswell is not a dual threat quarterback. I mean, he had 7 carries for 26 yards last week. Like they've not faced a ton of mobile quarterbacks as good as Haynes King. And he's a very, very good and talented runner. So I wonder if that's going to be a big factor. And I'm sure everybody's seen the quote going around yesterday. Like somebody asked Haynes King, whether he wants to be more involved in the run game or not. Like I just want to win, and like that's just kind of goes back to the gritty point. Like it's the truth. But like I'm very interested to see how their secondary handles Malik and Eric Singleton. Like those two, that's where the passing offense has been funneled this year a lot. Like Malik has been like fantastic. Like he has just been awesome. Eric's been a very good player as well, making big plays down the field. We've seen Avery Boyd get involved in the passing game as well, so that's definitely something to keep an eye on. But yeah, just some very interesting matchups, especially with the offensive line versus Duke's front. Like Duke's front poses challenges, I should say. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they handle that. But I think this is the best offense, most complete offense that they faced because like I still think Georgia Tech has the ability to run the ball. I know like it seems weird to say that right now because they haven't been able to do it in the past few games, but like I still believe that that's in them a little bit. So we'll definitely see how that goes. Again, Duke is not an elite run stopping defense, and I wonder if maybe Buster Faulkner sees something there. But anything else on this matchup? So I guess it's prediction time, is it not? Like I guess
Yes,
we'll
sir.
have to talk about it. You get started while I kind of look at the updated odds right here.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to say before I give my actual score prediction: if you're a betting man, 52.5 over underline. I think that's way too high in this game. I don't really think Duke is going to be scoring a lot of points in this game unless it's, off of a turnover maybe on defense. If I had to give a final score prediction, I would say Duke 13, Georgia Tech 24. I think Tech will win. I think it will be hard. I wouldn't be shocked if Tech is trailing at the half. I'm not going to diminish this Duke team. They're 5-0 for a reason. Like, they have found ways to win. I just think it'll be too much. I don't think you can take 4 quarters of Haynes King running the football and also being a passing threat, and we've seen that teams deteriorate defensively over time, especially when facing a dual threat quarterback, and especially facing a guy like Haynes King. He doesn't really like to go down at all after taking a hit. Like he'll take any kind of hit. But I do like Georgia Tech to cover, and I like the under. I like the under a lot in this game.
Yeah, so they are currently on FanDuel right now, favored by 8.5. I think that did surprise some people. It's not even that Duke's undefeated; it's that Georgia Tech does have a couple of losses in the column, and I guess when you just see a spread like that against an undefeated team, I guess it does really. It's a little bit surprising, but I think there's some built in there. Is just we don't really know how good Duke is because of their schedule. And again, I'm not trying at all to be disrespectful towards Duke. I just like the spread is what it is. Like I don't make the spread, but Vegas has Georgia Tech is 8.5 points better than Duke. I know it's a little bit of a narrative out there. Is generally as favorites, especially bigger favorites like Georgia Tech has had a harder time covering against teams not named VMI. So like that does make me a little weary. This is kind of the game, at least in terms of spread and stuff wise, that Georgia Tech has lost in the past. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I do think one thing that's interesting that I wanted to touch on before we make our official predictions is: do you think there's going to be any sort of hangover for for Duke after the North Carolina game? Because that could be that's an interesting narrative. You could talk yourself into as obviously North Carolina is Duke's biggest rival. It's a large comeback. It's the largest it's a 5-0 start. They're feeling themselves. Now they got to come on the road right after that, face a team that's coming off a bye week and that is also coming off a loss. Brent Key is 10-1 off losses. Like he does pretty well off losses, I guess. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was going to mention the same exact stat about Brent probably being 10-1. I don't think if there is a hangover, I don't think it'll be a huge hangover. I don't think Duke is going to come out, score 0 points through 3 quarters. Malik Murphy looks horrible. But I will say, I think it's possible for the game plan not to translate into this game because Duke, I wouldn't say they got handed the game. They did earn it. They did win that game by their own accord. It wasn't, North Carolina making a ton of mistakes. It was Duke kind of looking good on offense. They didn't look good at all in the first half. I think it's possible to see that. But I wouldn't count on it if you're Georgia Tech. I think Duke, they're a disciplined team, but they have had to fight for wins in almost all of their wins, even against teams like Northwestern, and obviously you had North Carolina last week, and then you fought for the win against UConn. You barely won that game. The only really convincing win you had was Middle Tennessee because you struggled against Elon for 3 quarters.
Yeah, and let me say, Middle Tennessee State is a disaster.
Yeah,
they're terrible.
And I don't know how much faith you can have in that schedule. Again, 5-0 is 5-0, but you're playing 5 teams who will probably not make a bowl game, maybe with the exception of UConn. It's rough to look at.
Yeah, I actually think that's interesting. UConn is now 3-2. They took one on the chin against Maryland, and then they lost to Duke, but they've actually crushed the past couple teams they've played. So again, UConn is obviously not a great team or anything. I just think it's interesting that they have the same record as North Carolina.
And they really they could make more than a bowl game because their schedule is very favorable. They play UMass, they play Temple, they play Wake, they play Rice, and they play Georgia State and UAB down the stretch. And I think all of those games are winnable.
Yeah, God help you if you have faith in UConn, but I guess it's possible. So I do buy into that a little bit, and I know it sucks being on the other side of that because it feels like we're taking away from Duke when we just bring up the schedule, and that is absolutely not what I'm trying to do. I do think it helps with context. I have questions. Their defense is good. Is it as good as the numbers suggest, or just playing Northwestern scored 13 points on Miami, Ohio, and that's not exactly a good offense either. So, and then again, Duke's offense, has not exactly put great numbers together against a not great strength of schedule. So that'll definitely be something. But I am going with Georgia Tech here. Look, I know I was kind of a downer last time, and I did pick Louisville, and I hated being right on that, but I just think their offense is going to find a way to get it done, and I think that their defense is going to come out wanting to prove something and prove that they're better than the numbers suggest. And again, I don't think Duke's offense is anemic or anything and just terrible, but I don't know how good it is. Malik Murphy, it can be a bit up and down. He obviously wasn't very efficient against North Carolina. Star Thomas has had a good game last time, but again, I read off several stat lines for games where they ran the ball 30 plus times and then just could not really get anything going. So I do think an underrated part of it is they do have good receivers and playmakers. And again, Georgia Tech secondary has not been very good to this point, but I don't think it's to the level of, Louisville's passing attack, obviously, which Georgia Tech had some problems with. So I think the defense will find a way to make some plays and get some stops. I have Georgia Tech winning by a score of 34-21.
Yeah, I would beg to differ with you a little bit on the score. I don't think it's going to be, that high. Obviously, I'm going to stick with my previous prediction. I'm going to say 13-24, 13 Duke, 24 Georgia Tech. I just don't think there's going to be a ton of points scored in this game unless in the very rare situation that Georgia Tech just gets out to a very huge lead, maybe scores off of a turnover on defense, and then obviously scores, first couple of drives. I think that's the only way it could become high scoring. But hey, if I'm a gambling man, I am hammering that under 52.5 this weekend.
Well, makes one of us.
This is not gambling advice, by the way.
Yeah. Just opinion. So we'll see what happens. We are gonna. It's we haven't had Georgia Tech football for a couple weeks. We've had to kind of stew over the loss to Louisville. We're gonna see how the team bounces back, and we're getting an undefeated team at home. Prime time game at Bobby Dodd Stadium. I expect there to be a good crowd, so I will be there. So we'll see what happens. But anything else on this matchup? Don't leave any stone unturned here.
That's all I got. I have no bold predictions. I think this game is going to be boring. Georgia Tech win by 2 scores.
Okay, well that's no fun. But yeah, we really appreciate you guys tuning in for this episode. Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, if y'all wouldn't mind just hitting the subscribe button, hitting the like button on the video. Be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when new content is up. I know it's been like over a week. We've kind of had to deal with, like I said, RJ, he covers baseball as well. So like we've had to, it's October. Y'all know what that means. Everybody knows what that means in baseball. So that's, and then the bye week and stuff, obviously. But we're back on a regular schedule. So we really appreciate you guys tuning in, following along on podcast form. Just be sure to hit the follow and everything like that. We really appreciate it. But we will see you next time. We plan to do a reaction on Saturday. I know it's going to be a bit of a late one, so you probably won't be listening to it till Sunday morning, especially if depending on the results. So we appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will see you next time.